All right. Well, good morning, Chairman.
Hello.
As you guys can see, if you're not listening, you're not watching online, and you're just listening, we are a Chairman short. Dr. Mason, Chairman Mason, is out with his family today, so it is just the two of us, the great Grant and I. Gonna talk through just some of our favorite products that we like to use as builders, just the everyday stuff. You know, we've talked through pedal accessories, essentials. You know, it's just one of those episodes where we'd love to give you guys as much information as just like our go-to stuff, so you're not wasting time and money, because those things are very important to everyone, and when everyone works very hard for their money. So we just kind of want to give you some great tips for stuff that we love to use and have been using. And I'm super excited to kind of compile a list of stuff and resources, and like a resource page that people can utilize to, further their tone experience or tone journey, their road to tone, as we would say.
Indeed. And I'm going to, I did wake up this morning knowing that Mason wasn't going to be here. Firstly, it hurt me a little bit knowing we'd be a chairman down, because this means, as well, that Oakley will not be showing up towards the end of the episode. So we're actually kind of 1.5 chairman down. So I did try, taking the hat off, letting my hair flow like Mason normally does, and it was just a bad vibe. So you really well and truly are. It's just going to be Grant and Brian today. I'm not even going to try and attempt any Mason, type personality traits or anything like that. So it's going to be good, though. I mean, for those of you guys listening, Brian, out of the three of us, Mason, myself, and Brian, by and large, like by far, builds the most rigs, and so I'm pumped to hear some of the tools that you've go to, and some of the tips and tricks and accessories and all that, because it'll be it's always really good to hear from someone that does this, like literally 30-40 hours a week you're doing builds.
40 hours a week.
So I mean, it's going to be great to be able to learn from you and go from there. So I don't know, man, where do you want to start this thing? When people ask you this, what's your go-to? What's the number one?
I think the first thing we should start with, and it's something that like, it's more of like, and we've touched on it in the past before, but it's kind of like connectivity, junction boxes. Whenever someone from me, anytime I have a client that wants to set up, they always send me a pedal list, and my immediate question is, all right, what kind of routing are we looking at? Are we doing like 4 cable method, wet, dry, wet, stereo, mono? What are you reamping? Like, what are you doing? 75% of the time, people are like, I don't know.
Yep. So
I typically will just be like, okay, well, here are some options. It kind of depends on what you're doing. If you're running 2 amps, you're running 1 amp, are you doing recording? And there's even stuff that comes down to like, I never thought about doing it that way. I've never done it that way. I would love to do it that way. Maybe I'll just do it eventually. So that kind of stuff. So I'm like, well, if you're going to invest the money in something, it's like us. We bought a brand new car, and they're like, well, do you want to buy do you want to buy this thing? Oh, I'll just buy it later. Well, it's harder to buy that later.
Roof racks.
Is a lot of.
I'm in the middle of that right now. Like,
literally,
I should have gotten roof racks when I first got the car, and now I got to pay an installer. Now I got to pay full price up front. No package deals. Yeah. Yes,
exactly. It's the same thing. It's just like you kind of like, that extra. I had one person who was like, to make it stereo, it would be an extra this much for cabling and 1 hour extra work. Like, nah. I'm like, okay, well, just so you know, if you do it later on, it's an extra 2 hours of work or 3 hours or whatever it is, because I have to undo a bunch of stuff. The plus shipping, there's a lot of extra stuff involved. So this is a lot of this junction box, which I'll share my screen if you're watching. If you're listening, you can just envision this.
1 sec.
Let me find the screen
there
share.
You go. And one thing I'll say for you, while you're bringing that up, Brian, as well, I mean, I think you have to take this in context as well, because I don't know if you would agree with if some of your customers have gotten scope creep, which is basically they come in saying, I want A, B, and C, And they're like, oh, and let's also add this pedal and let's also add that feature just in case, even though everyone knows they're never going to use it. And I'll add that fourth overdrive, even though it's never going to get turned on. And so you have to, I think what I always try and tell customers is like, plan this thing out well. Like think about what features you're actually going to use. I always say, if anyone's familiar with the Pareto principle, what are you going to use 80% of the time? That is what you need to put on your pedal board. Don't try and rearrange the whole thing for that last 15 to 20% that you're really, it's not going to be the core of what you use. If you go with 80%, your board's going to be smaller. Everything will be used. You're going to be much happier with it. But I think it really is thinking through all of those options of let's really dig in and find my 80% and not miss anything in there and then move forward from there.
Exactly.
That's my rant. I'll hand it back to you, Brian.
No, I love it. I think a big part of planning too is sometimes in planning, like you'll find like, okay, yeah, these are the easiest options. Like we'll talk about some of these junction boxes. Like 90% of the time I can get away with an interfacer and an Audition to do what I want on a setup. And it's fantastic. We have them in stock. They're ready to go. I can grab it and put it on. But then there's that percentage of the time where I'm like, man, it would be nice to have it all in one. So you and I are constantly talking about custom junction boxes and all these different things. And there's just so many aspects of that are really great to utilize for space, for consolidating space. Because some of these boxes you can stack stuff on. I just did a board where it was a big box you guys did, and we put a tuner on top of it to consolidate some space. Like there's just so much stuff that like people like kind of thinking about. But going over, whenever like I have someone reach out, and this is for grants for Goodwood Audio on their website, goodwoodaudio.com, under junction boxes. These are all of the junction boxes. I love all this stuff. I love the fact that you guys have a 3-channel stereo line mixer. I love the long line and the RCV series. Always RVC accidentally.
It's like PBC and PCB. I always get, do you guys have the PCB10? I'm like, so close. You almost got the product name.
Well, I had someone up front. They're like, do you have those VHSs? And I was like, VHSs. And they're like, yeah, the thing that connects to the long line. I'm like, oh, the RCV, like receive?
VHS.
Oh, I know. And I was like, you're thinking VHS from JHS, that pedal that they came out with.
Yep.
So there's the thing about when you think about starting off with a foundation of a pedal board build or anything is you have to kind of think of like, yes, power and power is a great thing to have, is your first thing you need to look at, but it's not the priority thing to look at first. You need to figure out what's on the board. And then typically for me, power is typically last to figure out because then you have everything on the board. So like, your inputs and your outputs are going to be, input, stereo output, reamping, wet dry, all these options that you want. So you need to find some kind of a junction box that can do a lot of this kind of stuff. And that's the great thing is you have wet, dry, wet, bass box, buzzkill, and there's just so many of these products, which I would love for you to be able to kind of briefly talk over some of these, like the buzzkill and stuff, what they do, just because there's a lot of stuff out there that people are like, oh, I'll just go out of my Big Sky into a direct box or something, in which then that opens up the question as well, are you running an amp sim? Are you running this? There's all these things. So like if someone say is running a UA Dream and then they're going into a Timeline and into a Tempest, like if you would, can you suggest of these boxes, like what you would suggest? I mean, I already know what you're going to say, but if someone that doesn't understand or know, there are certain of these boxes that you would and would not use.
Yeah, I think with junction boxes, I would say, again, Brian, please, I love it when the podcast gets spicy. Please disagree with me here. But I would say that not everybody needs a junction box. There are a lot of guys that will get in touch with us and say, like, I'm running my Polytune into 2 overdrives, a chorus delay and a reverb, always in mono, and my last reverb is a Blue Sky by Strymon, and maybe there's a volume pedal in the middle. And so my first question is to them, like, are you happy with always running mono, you're never going to change. Nope, it's always going to be mono. Their buffering is taken care of with a Polytune and the Blue Sky at the end, both great buffers. They're able to mute. Like, they've ticked all the boxes. I'm like, you don't need a junction unless you want to maybe open up 4-cable method or auditioning a pedal. Like, no, I'm really happy. I don't want to buy any more gear. Like, these people don't need a junction box in my mind, unless it's just a patch bay under their board, something really simple and passive, you know. So I don't think everyone needs a junction, but for those that need flexibility and they need some, maybe a little bit of signal conditioning, I think junction boxes are a great way to easily consolidate all of your patching into one spot on your board. And so there's a bunch of companies that do this. For us, my vision with the Goodwood audio junction boxes is probably a little bit different than some. Maybe not. Maybe I'm totally clueless. But I love the idea of being able to have one junction box that allows you to run a different output schematic or style in the different venues that you may need. So for option one, you might want to run stereo. The next venue you play is a bit of a harder alt rock band and you want to run 4-cable method. And then the next one after that, you're practicing at home in mono. And you want to then be able to run wet dry. I love the idea that you don't need to repatch your board and you can run all of this in one junction box without having to rip up your whole board to make it happen. So that's like my vision behind junction boxes, along with the buffering and the muting and isolation, ground lift, and, you know, flipping polarity, all that. Whereas other people like Empress, they do an awesome junction box, like a Buffer or Buffer Plus, and they have like noise reduction built in. That's not something I offer, and it's not something I really want to be honest. Empress does an awesome product, and it's different, still in the junction box realm. And so we just have a different approach to this stuff. And so for me, it's flexibility and maybe signal conditioning with buffering and isolation. They do noise gates and they do awesome buffers and level controls and all this. So I think it's finding the company that ticks the box for what you really need. And depending on what you need, you're going to need to go to a different company. So for the one that you mentioned with Dream, maybe modulation, delay, reverb, I would probably suggest going with something like Longline, or a similar product might be Daiso by Pinstripe or Canvas by Walrus. They allow you to have balanced outputs. And so I think there's some really, you know, great products out there. But the cool thing with these balanced output products is you can run your amp sim like a Dream that does not have balanced outs in stereo or mono, and you can run straight to a desk. If you have Longline, you can turn off your amp sim and you can run to your amp 300 feet away. So there's just a whole bunch of great options. So on the screen, if you're watching right now, is Daiso Plus by Pinstripe Pedals. Great product. And then Canvas, again, they have a mono and a stereo version, which is basically a passive DI. So there's pros and cons to each product. Even the Goodwood ones, like there's pros and cons in comparison to other ones, and you just need to find what ticks the boxes for you as far as these products go. So it's just like an overdrive. Like I'm sure Mason would say the same thing. There's Vertex overdrives, and depending on what you want, maybe the Vertex one isn't the best one for you. Maybe you need to go with just a classic TS9, or maybe you need to go with something else. I'm not that sure. You need to find what works for you.
Exactly.
I'm always a little hesitant right off the bat. I just saw a picture of a board the other day, and it wasn't a sponsored build as far as I could tell. Literally every pedal that could be Strymon was Strymon. From overdrives, compressor, delay, reverb, modulation, everything was Strymon. And I love Strymon. But Strymon has a sound, and I don't want my board to sound like Strymon. I want to find the companies that tick the boxes for me, you know, across my entire board. So I might have a couple Strymons, I might have a couple Maxons, I might have a couple Vertex, you know, but I am not going to have one person's interpretation of how a guitar rig should sound. For me, it just isn't going to work. So I think there's just a lot to say about the junction side of things. And but before we move on, Brian, I want to tell you guys a little bit about two of our sponsors. The first one is the Gear Exchange. This is on sweetwater.com. You can get to the Gear Exchange by going sweetwater.com/used. And basically, this is, I know Mason always talks about this one as well. It's kind of like the best of Craigslist and Reverb or eBay, but mixed into one. It's a used gear platform where you can buy and sell used gear, but you can actually skip the fees. I mean, if only there was a skip the fees button on reverb.com. I don't want to pay this. You can do that at Sweetwater at the Gear Exchange by putting all of your earnings onto a Sweetwater gift card. You can spend within the Sweetwater website and you don't have to pay any fees on what you sell. It's a really cool idea where I think everyone is the winner. Sweetwater's the winner. We as the sellers and the buyers are winners. And so you can check out some awesome gear at sweetwater.com/used. And that is called the Gear Exchange. So definitely check that out. I also wanted to tell you guys about the Guitar Sanctuary, which is where Brian himself, the Pedalboard DIY tip master, is housed right now. So check out the guitarsanctuary.com. The vast majority of all the gear we're going to be talking about even today is actually at the Guitar Sanctuary. And you can buy some gear there. You can then hire Brian to put your whole board together using a lot of the tips we're going to be talking about today. And you can get him to do that for you and get an incredible rig at the Guitar Sanctuary. So check out the guitarsanctuary.com. And Brian, I'll throw it back to you and you can keep us moving.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think everything you said about junction boxes is awesome. I do agree that there are some rigs that don't need them. I think the rigs that don't need them, but people still want them, it sometimes will complicate the setup. If it's like, oh yeah, I'm using an interface here, but I'm going through the passive and I'm only going out mono. Like, well, is any of the board wired for stereo? Like, there's just all these, like, it's just not being used. That's, I think you guys used to make a box that did like an in and an out. I can't remember if you did. That wasn't an audition. I can't remember. Or
I honestly can't either. That would have been so long ago. You have a better memory than I do. But it sounds like something we would have done. Yeah, a simple patch pay. Yeah.
It's like, and that's a common thing. Like, I wanted to share before we move on to our next thing. The great thing, I just lost my train of thought. The great thing about the internet, patch base. Yes, the great thing about the internet is that there's just so much resource. So like Mason has a wiring diagram for his patch bay that you can get for, if you get a Vertex board, you have the ones that mount to the side of the board, or they have the standalone patch bay units. So it looks more like this, where he'll give you wiring diagrams on how you can wire that board, dual mono, stereo. And I'm creating a doc right here that will have all of these links, and I'll make it available for you guys, and we'll probably have it in the show notes. Just so you can, see all these different types of options: a 5 cable method, an audition loop, putting a volume, doing all these different options, wet, dry, wet. See? There's just all these, if you have a fuzz, how to put it. That's the cool thing, is that there's all these options. So depending on your need, you can see if a box like this works. Grant, it has all these amazing different boxes that just do. That's another amazing product that you also have too, that we'll talk about. So there's a lot of great stuff on the internet. A lot of it can get confusing. I will say that. And just what people are trying to, they're like, this is the best box on the market. And like, okay, well, why? But then they don't tell you like what all it
just
does.
Trust me.
It's like, you should buy this guitar. Well, why should I buy this guitar? It's the best guitar. And then you pay the money and you get it. And you're like, this freaking sucks. Like, I do not like this. I don't like the radius of the guitar. I don't like this. It's the same thing as some of these boxes. And I've had people just like see junction box and buy it. And then they get it, and then they're like, oh, well, what the heck? It doesn't have TRS out. Oh, it doesn't have MIDI. It doesn't have summing. It doesn't have phase. What? I'm like, you basically bought a pass-through box. Like some of these companies will do pass-through boxes, like Creation does, and a patch bay right here for the Elevation series boards, $49. I mean, you're not going to get phase, ground, sum, all that kind of stuff in here. And it's literally just a pass-through box. So just really do your research on those kind of things if that's something, you're wanting to get. reach out and ask. This is always one of the things I'm going to ask to figure out if it's something that you need. Because like Grant said, sometimes you don't need it. And sometimes it makes things more difficult. And it just, it can complicate things.
Yeah.
But another one of my like go-to things, and this is actually something we talked about even before we started doing the podcast today, are risers, pedal risers to be, exact, because on fixedpedalboards.com, they have a huge catalog. And the great thing about them is that they also have the pedal, like little photo of them, which is really cool. So you can see a blue sky or, a timeline or the volante, all these different sizes. Obviously, when you get into these, they don't show, but they have dimensions and they show height. So some of these you can fit power supplies under. And where this kind of stuff comes in handy is people are like, man, if I have to buy, like I just bought 10 of these for a build or 5 of these for a build.
The boss size ones.
The boss size, yeah. So it's the FP-2 pedal riser. So it's a boss sized riser, and I'll click on it. So it fits right on a boss. That comes with all the screws and stuff to bolt it in. If you're listening, you can go to fixedpedalboards.com for pedal risers, and you can see all this great stuff. They come with the screws to bolt it to the board or to screw it into the board. If you have like a Creation Aero series, you could use bolts, or you could, if you have a flat board or if you have a Vertex board, you can bolt it or screw it in. But the cool thing about this stuff that I think a lot of people forget is, yes, it is $10. I get it. So 5 of them is $50, but $50 though, to save the type of space that you do when you get these. I'm not saying buy 5 of these and you're going to be able to fit 15 more pedals on the board, because it's not that magical. It's not a Klon Centaur, but it's something that you can get that will raise the pedal from the board, allow a better, cleaner channel on the sides. So if you're looking at, I'm not sure if you can even see my cursor. Can you see my cursor?
Yeah, I can. Yep.
Great. So you can run channels on the side here, on each side of it, or you can go through the center, like underneath the pedal. They have little cutouts on the side if you needed to run a cable through and then run it out each side. So like if you were doing a channel and you want the cables to come out on the side, there's all these like little spots. Obviously these are the screw holes and stuff, but there's all these little things on the risers that just allow for, cleaner cabling. This, like, there's different sizing of it. There's like height difference. I think this is like a 1/2 inch tall, 3/4 tall. So they have like really skinny ones, but then they also have, 1.5 inch tall, 1.5 inch tall that, I can fit like Strymon Ojai R30s under this.
Yeah.
So like, that's the kind of stuff. Cause if you think about it, say you have a timeline and a big sky and you have 2 R30s, Ojais and a Zuma, but you can't figure out where to put the Ojai R30s. You can hide them under here. You don't have to do a bigger board. You don't have to strap them to the bridge. Like, there's all these things. You want certain things like MIDI box 4s, conduits, Ojais, those kind of things to go under stuff like this, so you can hide stuff better. And it just makes things look a lot cleaner, and really allows for better pedal placement and keeps the noise level down. Back in the day, and still now, there's sometimes, like, I find like people will stack compressor pedals on top of their pedal power pluses, and they're like, man, it's so noisy. Why is this so noisy? I'm like, well, we'll remove the compressor from the thing, and as soon as they remove it, the hum goes away. So there's stuff like that, like pedal bridges, pedal risers, that just makes such a difference in the noise level and can just really clean up the overall setup. I do want to talk about another one on the riser level that I would love for you to kind of chat about. And you'll notice as soon as I pull it up, it's your guys' lift system. I would really love to hear about it. It's very lifting. Looks very lifting. Dad jokes forever. I had someone comment on one of our posts talking about how the dad jokes weren't good. So
are they supposed to be though?
I don't
I thought
know.
that's the whole point of a dad joke, is they're not supposed to be good. That's what I've been basing my whole life and humor around, is bad dad jokes. So I think that maybe that was a compliment. Man, your dad jokes really suck. Oh, thanks, man.
They must not be a dad. That must be the thing.
They'll understand soon.
Right. You'll get their son one day. So yeah, no, I would love for you to talk about it, and just because I can see there's 3 different sizes, it tells you the price and everything. And I would love for you to kind of give us some ideas, because I mean, a lift, it's lifting up, but I would love to hear from you, kind of like, your recommendation for this, or what your go-to is for raising the pedals. Because I do have another recommendation, and I have a feeling you'll say the same thing, because I'm pretty sure I learned it from y'all years ago, but I would love to kind of get your thoughts on risers.
Yeah, I think, again, risers are not for everyone, and there are things you need to consider when you're getting a riser. But basically, I designed Lift to combat some of the problems I was having with the current risers on the market. And I'll admit myself, by no means does it tick every box. It ticks certain boxes for certain people. That's my non-committal answer. But basically, Lift, the goal was I wanted something that could be hinged, so you could use it, so you could, lift up the top platform and access what's underneath, which does exist. I wanted something that was height adjustable, because sometimes you want to put an O-high, other times you want to put a timeline, and those are drastically different heights. And so I wanted it to be height adjustable, and I really wanted it to be strong, which sounds like a no-brainer, but there are risers out there that you can't put too much weight on them or else they'll bend. So even we have a 12, 16, and 21. Even on the 21, I can stand in the middle of it and I won't do any damage to it. So, and I'm, especially after COVID, I don't know if you can relate to me, Brian. I'm not as light as I once was. So, I'm around the 200-pound mark. And so that was my goal with it. I wanted to tick those boxes. And, but the thing I love about what other companies do, Fix being one of them, I think Vertex does this as well. I know they do, is the magnet system. So I love that idea. You put the riser down and a magnet kind of holds it in place. Lift doesn't do that. And so there's some really cool ideas out there that other people are also doing. So yeah, I think risers are great. The one thing though, excuse me, the one thing that a lot of people don't consider when they're getting any riser is, how will this affect my case? So if you raise up a pedal and you have a flight case, you need to make sure that your flight case actually has the room to have that extra height in it. So a riser is a great way to store things underneath pedals that you need to access, but you need to consider how this will affect your case as well. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah. I think a big thing too with that kind of stuff, like risers, they're not, bless you.
Sorry, man.
You're good. No, you're good. I think with stock cases from a lot of companies, and that's a whole other, subject of stuff that are cases, because there's things that are necessary and unnecessary, kind of depends. But when it comes to risers, you always, you can't, for me, I cannot buy any of the Vertex risers and order a stock creation case.
Yeah.
I order both of those collectively the same time, all the time, every day. I'm always ordering that stuff, because unless you get a custom size, like the riser is 3.5 inches tall for a standard Vertex riser, and then a flat series, even a Vertex board is what, a half an inch or 3/4 of an inch or something like that. I have one right here. Let me see. Just measure it. The board and the case, the board and bridge together is just over 4.25. So when you think about that,
that's before pedals on the top row, right? So then you add another pedals. 1.5 inches, 2 inches.
Yeah, and I have a board right here that has a Big Sky on it. And with the Big Sky, it's hitting almost 7 inches tall. Whew. So you have to find cases that will fit that. And if you find a case that says it is, 24 by 12.5 and it's 7, that is going to be the dimensions of the outside of the case. That is not the dimensions of the inside of the case. So where you have the convoluted foam and the flat foam, the egg crate foam, whatever you call it. I always call it egg crate. I'm pretty sure it's convoluted or something like that. Those types of things take up almost an inch of space. So you have to find cases like SKB and Pelican. Those are some of my favorite cases because of the plug and pull, or you can get, you can really foam it out from a lot of these companies. I think Zactone, they foam out. They have, I don't know if they do it, but they have a company that foams out a lot of these Pelican cases. Circle 3 Designs, they do a lot of these insert where they custom, like, not mold it because that's expensive, but they have a CNC, and I love it. If you go to their Instagram, they build cases for everyone that's on tour, but they have a CNC machine where they CNC out foam to fit that product, so like a board or fit a rack or whatever. It's amazing stuff. So there's a lot of companies that will do it. Obviously, it's a little expensive, but you have to invest in your investment. That's the thing. You have to protect your investment. You don't drive your car without insurance. So, like, even though you can buy insurance for pedal boards and for gear and stuff, your insurance is that case and that protection that you're using. But for risers and stuff, you just have to think about that kind of stuff. You just got to think about, okay, what is the height what's the tallest pedal gonna be? And that's the very first thing John Snyder, when I'm ordering a case, he says is, first off, what is the tallest pedal of the board gonna be? And most of the time I'm like, it's this one. He goes, go and measure it. I need to know exactly what the height is and everything so we can figure out foam. So it's one of those tedious things, but it's in the end, when you set your board in there and everything locks in and compresses really nice and well inside and everything is well protected, it just is really great. I want to continue talking about risers, but before we do, I do want to mention 2 more of our amazing sponsors. This first one is going to be Neural DSP. I have been using the Quad Cortex for a couple weeks, I think a little over a month now, and I love it. I haven't used their plugins. I'm pretty sure Mason and Grant have the plugins that they've been messing with, which I've seen the videos, and they look fantastic. They sound fantastic. Neural DSP is just a great company. They're coming out with an editor for their Quad Cortex, hopefully by the end of the year. But they have a discount code. It is Chairmen for 30% off, CHAIRMEN for 30% off. And before you get too excited, it is not on their Quad Cortexes. It is on all of their plugins and everything. So if you are doing plugin stuff with Studio, or you need direct plugins for your computer, go check out Neural DSP. It does not apply to any of their new stuff. So if you hear this today and today they drop a brand new John Mayer signature plugin for amp, I don't know. Whatever they drop, you can't get that with that discount. You have to wait 90 days and then you can get it. So in 91 days, you can get that plugin for almost 70% free, if you think about it. So they're our first one, and we love them. They're great. Look forward to all their new stuff that they'll be coming out with. And I also love seeing all these Quad Cortex racks. I might have the opportunity to build one for a band I've listened to for years. So I'm really excited to possibly get to work more with the quad stuff. But our second sponsor, and this is definitely one of those sponsors that I have a lot of their stuff. And I have a lot of these sponsor stuff, but it's going to be Mono Creators. I have their DJ backpack, their Fly backpack. I have their dual acoustic electric case for my White Falcon and whatever other guitar I bring. And I have pedalboard cases. I have a ton of their stuff because their stuff is amazing. And it's durable and it's built well. And they have pedal boards and power supplies, and which we haven't tried. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the podcast, maybe get one on. But Mono has a code for Chairmen, CHAIRMEN, for 10% off. Go check them out. They have they call them the Tick. I think it's Tick series, where you can actually strap a little pedal board to your guitar bag and go. Great company, great system. Check them out. Those are 2 more of our amazing sponsors, and we are so appreciative of our sponsors because they make this podcast happen. Mm-hmm. And we are grateful for their stuff and their products, and I love them. So moving back on to pedal risers, I think going back to our conversation, there's the thing is some people are like, oh, I need a riser. It's the same thing, the junction box thing. I think this rule will kind of apply to everything except power. Power is definitely the one thing that everyone needs, because if you don't have it, then you got no power. So
indeed,
if it's just one of those things. So looking at like Vertex, Mason has come out with this bridge system, which is amazing, and he has boards that have cutouts. They have the traditional series, or they have cutout series where you can put like a wah pedal, or you can put a wah and volume. There's all these different orientations, all these different flat boards. There's all these companies that do some kind of a riser system. So it kind of comes down to the rule of thumb of, it kind of depends on if you need it. How many pedals are you running? If you're running a board that you're putting everything on the bridge and there's nothing underneath the riser, you probably don't need the riser. If it just adds a lot of weight. It adds a lot of weight, a lot of height to your case. It's just bigger, bulkier. I have one behind me right now that there's stuff strapped to the board under the riser. There's strapped to stuff under the riser on the physical riser, and there's stuff strapped on top of the riser.
Crazy.
So it's like the avenue of that board, the board that you had talked about that you had to redo, where there's just stuff everywhere connected. Honestly, I'm not surprised there's not stuff connected to the side of the riser at this point. So it just kind of depends on what you need, because some of this stuff is expensive, as you can see the prices, and they're not, it's not one of those like the product reflects the price because of the quality of the material. Like your lift, I think it started at $119, but the material of it, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it's thicker. It's thicker than like the Vertex stuff. So you can step on it, because what's interesting and what I find is, and I say this to people all the time, and maybe it's just me because I don't step on it. If I have a switcher, I'm not stepping on these pedals on the bridge. I'm stepping on the switcher. But there is a huge handful of people, even Bradford Mitchell, when I did his board, the collab we did with Vertex, I built his rig. He still steps on his bridge pedals, and I was like, man, why are you still stepping on them? I'm like, oh, it's kind of habit. Sometimes I'll tap on them, so like we have to get like a support leg for one of his bridges and that kind of stuff. So there's some of these products out there like yours that are designed so you don't have to have support legs. Fixing them will do support legs that kind of helps. So it kind of just depends, but the price, quality over quantity kind of thing, if one bridge is $150, you have to look at the longevity of it and how it's built and everything.
One other thing with these, I don't know if you've ever done this, Brian, but when we first started doing setups, these risers, they were not a thing. They weren't really around, at least not that I was aware of. And so we still needed to raise pedals up in certain scenarios. So we just got a little dodgy. We got some plywood, spray painted it black after cutting it to size, put some supports wherever they were needed. And so, I mean, even if you're a little handy yourself and you don't want to, commit to spending this much money on a metal, prefab riser, just get some plywood, cut it to size, wear protective eyewear, of course, and then spray paint it, wear a mask, and you're good to go. Like, you can screw that into a board if you need to. You can bolt it if you need to. You can Velcro it or dual lock it. Like, I think there's some easy workarounds if you don't want to do that, and just get a feel for it. Is this actually what I need? We would always, when we did the wooden ones, we would typically Velcro them, which obviously is not as sturdy as bolting it, but if you're making your own dodgy wooden riser and you have power underneath, it's really nice to be able to just disconnect it, access power, maybe you're wiring it or changing something, and then Velcro it back down. So long as your pedalboard case puts pressure on the top row, you really don't have anything to worry about, because when it's out of the case, you're obviously not going to be flipping it upside down, unless that's a thing the kids are doing these days, but it'll stay in place, no problem. So there's things you can do to do little workarounds. And one other little trick, I don't know if you've done this as well, Brian, but if you get, those individual pedal risers where you're just trying to get a bit of height and you undersize them a little bit, so the riser's a little bit smaller than the base of the pedal, and you have multiple pedals stacked beside each other, by undersizing the risers, you're creating cable channels in between each pedal that you can easily run cables through without interruption. Whole bunch of little things you can do with that. But Like the metal risers, Vertex Fix, Goodwood audio ones, like it's all great. But there are also workarounds, little DIY hacks you can do as well to save yourself some money if that'll work for your use case.
Exactly. Yeah, if I can pull up a video, let's see if it'll work. If I can screen shares, maybe this will work. It'd be cool if it works.
I just don't know if audio shares. That's the only thing I'm not sure about.
Can you see this?
Oh yeah, this is your post.
Yeah, so this is one I just did. I would pull up a photo, but I just don't have one. So looking at this one, these are the pedal risers that we actually just talked about. But as you can see, the raising them up creates a channel, and you think, oh man, that's a lot of space between. But if these pedals were on the physical board, the jacks, depending on the orientation of the jacks, like here, when I wire them, the jacks will probably face down, likely. Even though, as you can see, there's all that slack. I can tuck slack if I want. Some of these are top mounted jacks. It kind of depends, but the jacks can face down. If this is on a flat board, which it is on a flat board, but if these pedals were physically, and even getting here, it gets really tight. Like a pedal right here would not fit because of how I have everything ran. But when you put this pedal on top of here, and this cable can run around, or they can tuck or whatever I want, it just creates so much space under the board, which it just makes it really handy. And I gotta say, because you just talked about the wooden ones, when I was starting out, I saw you guys do the wooden blocks, and it blew my mind. I was like, literally like, babe, I can go to Home Depot, and this is what I did because I couldn't afford the tools. I would go to Home Depot and get sample pieces of flooring wood.
Oh, perfect.
Because they came in little block sizes.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, this is like a KTR size, even though I had like a JHS double bolt or something.
And at Home Depot, they're just like, man, this guy can't make up his mind on his floor. Keeps coming back.
And I'm like renovating my board. You don't know that. But yeah, so like I used that for a long time, and then I think I saw you guys, you did a collab with Creation and Jeffrey Cundy.
Yeah.
On a board build that y'all did for him, and you used something like this, these like pine block. I think it's like
they do a bunch of pedals, right?
Yeah, it was like it's 1 by 1, I think 1 or 1 by a half or something or whatever. It comes in like a 6-foot strip or whatever, and it's pretty cheap. And I saw you guys use those to raise up like the timeline in the Big Sky, so the Big Sky was just above the jacks or whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna try that, and I did that, and it's become my go-to. I don't have a saw here; I have a saw at home, but I will get my saw and I'll cut, Strymon size, or I'll cut. And it's harder when you get into some of the smaller pedals, just because it can get wobbly. But I would do this, drill a hole through it, use a step bit so I could recess the screw in. But before I would screw it in, I would go outside and I would spray paint it. Yeah. I have done staples on it. I've done super glue on the Velcro side because Velcro doesn't stick, or dual lock doesn't stick very well to wood, especially when it's painted. So there's all these little tips and tricks. You can use a handsaw. I think I have a handsaw somewhere up here. See it, but it's right here. I have this little handsaw that I'll use if I need to cut something on the spot, and I use that stuff all the time. It's affordable. Obviously, it's like $6 or something for 6 feet or something, but it's something that you need really quick to raise up some pedals. Obviously, I don't do big long strips of it because to me that just doesn't look super clean. But if you do them to where they fit under the H9, H90, Strymons, all these types of things, it'll allow cleaner cable channels, which is cool. So I got to give you hats off to y'all, because you showed me that. And like I said, 10 years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm a schmuck. All my stuff is on the bottom of my board. Like, how am I not raising pedals up? I'm like tipped, and I don't like barefoot buttons. I'm just not a fan of those buttons. So I will not do that. So I would have to tiptoe over the press of Big Sky or something, because I didn't have a MIDI controller. So there's just stuff like that just makes things easier when it comes to building. And that's the big part. I was trying to find another link. That's the big thing with the boards is you want to find things that make your gigging, if you're full-time or if you're a hobbyist or you only gig once a week. Like I only gig once a week right now. So I am finding any and every way to make my life as simple as possible. If you are out on tour and stuff, and I have frequent conversations with Seal about this stuff right now because he is getting into like he plays guitar, but he wants to learn more about like gear and technique, and he's taking lessons online from someone for guitar stuff. But like he's like, man, there's just so much knowledge about this stuff. It's kind of hard to understand what I should do. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's the thing with being a guitarist is that we're in such an overload system of gear out there that some people have, 10 overdrives on their board, and some people like me who have one overdrive on their board. And there's just all these options. You have to do what you think is best for your setup. And, sometimes figuring out those setups just kind of, it takes a trial and error sometimes, I would say, when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's just, nothing's ever going to be perfect. We all build stuff like we talk about. We build full time. We're building boxes. We're building boards. We're doing videos and all this stuff. But like, I have plenty of times where my stuff, I'll change something up, or I'll quickly do a change or something and I've messed something up and I have to figure it out, or I have to tweak something, because we're always experimenting, and then the environments are always different, and the sound systems and the PAs and the in-ear monitors, everything is always different. So things are going to change. But the more you can do to just kind of set yourself up for success, and having a junction box, if you're running stereo and you think you're going to have a possible ground, you're future proofing yourself in a way. That's kind of what you're doing. You're, if I'm running stereo, I definitely need something for a ground lift on the right side in case, at these venues, or I need some kind of a ground lift for an amp, or, that brown box or something to make sure my amp's running. There's all these different things you should think about, which another one would be kind of like cable looms, because I think that's one thing that a lot of people will do, is that they'll just get, and it's not wrong. It's not a wrong thing to just have 2 instrument cables, 3 instrument cables, and you're just, you get to the gig and you have to spend 10 minutes untangling them, that kind of stuff. Like I build them all the time, and I literally have like a 50-footer one down here that I can't get sold. Someone bought it and then they needed a longer one, so we swapped it out. But that's another thing, is like cable looms. As some people are like, oh man, I need a 30-foot 4-cable method loom. Like, okay, cool. So what are you doing? Like, oh yeah, I'm only running mono. Are you running an effects loop? No. Where's your board? Oh, well, my amp is right next to me. Okay, well then maybe you don't need a 30-foot 4-cable method loom, because 30 times 4 is equals a lot of cable. Those kind of things. So I'm curious for you, do you recommend cable looms? Do you recommend not going with cable looms over a certain feet? Is that why the long line kind of came out for you for doing this, that you were trying to cut down on? Because you guys used to do like audio looms and that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, audio looms, I was happy to stop doing, to be honest. They are such, I'm sure you found this, but the way that we did them to where I felt like they were robust enough to tour, they took hours to build. It's like a 4-cable method with an IEC in it or something, with a power in it or something. They were so labor intensive, which means they were expensive. They probably took 2.5 to 3 hours to build. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they're great. And I think there are much cheaper ways to build them, like getting, and I'm not sure what the correct terminology is here, but getting a standard, the equivalent of an XLR snake, where everything is actually already in some sheathing that you can buy it from, and you can just buy it per foot. I think those are great. And so Brian has this on screen if you're watching on YouTube. And so pre-buying them like that, it might not look as good maybe as TechFlex, or maybe you're into that and it looks even better to your opinion. And those are good. They're relatively reliable. The cable isn't as thick, and Brian's got a gigantic one with TechFlex. This is more what we would have built back in the day. But as soon as I moved back to Vancouver, Canada, I left all the looming stuff back in Sydney and we just stopped doing them. So that's really the reason why. But I was happy not to build those anymore. So I think they're handy if you're frequently needing a loom. I think they're great. But a lot of people, it's just every once in a while they might use it, and it might just be easier to set up 2 20-foot instrument leads rather than paying for a full loom. It depends on your context. Again, I think some people it's awesome, other people it's overkill, but some people just like having it in a clean, tidy cable loom, and that works for them. That's great. Yeah. Go to Bestronix and get a loom from them, or get Brian to build you one, and Bob's your uncle. But I think it's an added expense that if you don't need it, just skip it, buy another instrument lead, and go to town.
Yeah. I also recommend going to Bestronix. Don't go to me. I tried not to do them.
Oh, okay. All right. I take it back.
No.
Go to Brian and he'll send you to Bestronix.
Don't give me your money. Don't do that. No, I they're fun to do occasionally. This last one I did, it was 55 feet, but it was 4 cables and it was IEC power.
That's huge.
So if you've never built a Tex Flex loom, and maybe I'm just doing it wrong. Maybe the guys at Bestronix are just have Mason came out with a thing. I think he sent us a link, or he did a video or something where it was like all the cable coiled up and you could strip back and they were all color coded, and it was like in this tubing, which was brilliant. I loved it. I was like, now I'm tempted. But like, if you think about it, you have to first off tie off, or I use electrical tape with the cables, and I tie it all together, and then you have to every half inch or every 6 to a foot, you have to scoot the cable through all the way down to Tex Flex ever, and then by the end of it, your arms, you feel like you're like a bodybuilder, but really they're just laying on the ground because you're so freaking tired from, and then you got to solder it all, which is exhausting, and that opens up the door to buffering, making sure you're having buffering on sends and returns,
especially with effects loops. If you have a passive effects loop, you got to buffer at the effects loop, especially on a channel or a run that long.
Yes,
it introduces issues for sure.
55 feet is not just all the cable combined. That's 55 times 4. That's what, 200 and...
Well, it depends what your instrument lead would be from your guitar. Yeah. So you run maybe a 20 foot from your guitar to board, and then 3 more cables at 55 feet each. I mean...
It's a lot. It ends up being a lot. And front one of these was a wireless, so it was wireless front and then send and return. Yeah. But and luckily for these guys, this was for the Misfits. Doyle, they have buffers at their rack and on the board and everything, so it accounted for everything. But they are good. There are pros and cons to having them. Yes, cleaner cabling, less stuff to have to untangle, because you get to the gig and you do this thing to try to slightly untangle them.
We've all been there.
We've all done it. We all do it. I still do it, and I'm running a quad Cortex. So it's it's just one of those things. You just gotta I go back to, you just kind of gotta future proof, gig proof yourself, and you're never gonna be perfect when it comes to this kind of stuff. Is you just kind of gotta figure out what you're doing to make life simpler. I do want to talk about one other thing, but before we do, I do want Grant to talk about one more of our amazing sponsors.
I'm here for you. Bestronix. We were just chatting about these guys. The guys that do the looms also do any set of pedalboard accessories, D-socket connectors. Those are like locking jacks or XLRs, patch panels. They do a really cool patch panel actually for pedal train, which I really like. It allows you to kind of mount this side mounted patch panel for pedal trains and all sorts of connections. They do incredible stuff. All sorts of different little hacks and workarounds that you might not think about unless you go to their website and just see what they're capable of, which is a lot. So ask for Brad at btpa.com, Bestronix, and use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, for 10% off your order at Bestronix. And I think you'll be glad that you checked them out.
Yeah, Besttronics. I love other stuff. It's a lot of like even their social media, their YouTube videos. Brad will just talk about the rigs that he's building. That's how I learned how to build a redundant quad cortex rack, just by watching the video, which is really cool. And that's the thing.